Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other topics, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast here to tell you about Michelob Ultra Courtside. It's getting fans closer to the NBA with a chance to win prizes like courtside seats, a trip to All-Star Weekend, and much more. Check it out at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access, Courtside 24-25 sweepstakes, no purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 and up. Begins on October 1st, 2024, ends July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
Hey, where you been? Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, come on in.
Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. I'm Stephen Means, and that's Stefan Krajisnik. We are back. Took a week off because I left the country, and there just wasn't a lot of Ohio State news happening, and so it was just a good week to press the reset button so we can start to move forward with the 2025 calendar year, even though it's the middle of February. What's late February by the time you're hearing this? Obviously, we're headed off to the Combine the next 2 days. You're going to hear us previewing the Combine, talking to Ohio State offensive players and the Ohio State defensive players and who has the most to gain this week during the Combine. 15 guys, 7 on offense, 8 on defense. Tomorrow we'll do offense. On Wednesday we'll do defense before we go talk with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau and the rest of the defensive linemen and Cody Simon as a linebacker as well. But this is your Monday pod, your Leave No Doubt pod. This is always big picture. This is always – it doesn't really matter what's happening during the week. We're always just thinking big picture with these pods. And during the season, a lot of times we'll be doing rewatches and whatnot. It's all about in the theme of leaving no doubt. What we're doing today is a very, 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 very early Big Ten tiers pod. I sent Stefan 6 different tiers to put the 18 teams in. We're coming off a year where the Big Ten had 4 college football playoff teams. Only one of them did not make it to at least the quarterfinal because Indiana lost to Notre Dame, who eventually got to the national championship game. Oregon lost their only CFP game to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, but they had the bye as the Big Ten champ, who was undefeated throughout the year in their first year in the Big Ten, while Ohio State obviously won the national championship. And Penn State got to the college football playoff semifinal. Oregon beat Penn State in the Big Ten championship game as well. Stefan, overall, 12 of the 18 teams in the Big Ten made it to bowl games or the postseason. And of the 8 that were not in the CFP, they went 5-3 in those games, and we'll break down all of those teams. Also, fun fact, there is only one new head coach in the Big Ten this year. Do you know from where?
It's Barry Odom filling in at Purdue from UNLV.
For you, man. Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. Yeah, year 1 replacing Ryan Walters. Everybody else is in year 2 or further. There was a lot of new head coaches in the Big Ten last year, which is part of the reason why there's not a lot this year. And there weren't many retirements there was one firing, but that's it. So here are the tiers. And we're going to start from the bottom to the top. Tier 6 is called the bottom feeders. And it's literally bad program. Coach might be on the hot seat, or you're just historically bad, so there's no hope for you. Tier 5 is the rebuilders, a program that's at ground zero of something. You're excited because of something new, but are in the early stages of what you're building. So we don't really know what you are yet, and so we can't really judge you right now. Tier 4 is no man's land. You're just ... fine. Not really bad enough for it to be a disaster, not really good enough to get a fan base excited. And I think that's the most interesting tier, because I'm not sure as a fan what you're supposed to think about yourself being in no man's land in any sport. That's always the thing. You don't want to be in the middle, and they're just kind of in the middle. Tier 3, the up-and-comers / 1 year away. Bowl eligible is your floor, but you should be taking steps towards being more. we should view you as a CFP team in 2026 or 2027. So these are the guys where we see it. We'll see it this year. We'll see some signs of life in a way that a year from now, when we're doing these tier pods again, they're in tier 2, which is playoff or bust. You should be in the college football playoff race. The Big Ten got 4 teams in year 1. You should be in the hunt to repeat that every single year. That's 3 or 4. That should be the goal for the Big Ten. Not making the CFP is a disappointing season for you if you're in CFP or bust. And then tier 1 is Natty or bust, which I think those 2 tiers, I want to have a conversation with you about some of these teams, because this is a hard tier to consistently stay in, because this means you're maximizing every window. It's legitimate chances of winning a national title. Anything less than a Final Four appearance essentially means your season was a disappointment. Let's start with tier 6. Stefan, I don't know Stefan's tiers yet. He doesn't know mine. We're doing this right now. Who's in tier 6 bottom feeder for you?
So I want to ask you a question. When you went about these, were you thinking 2025 season, or were you thinking like state of the program, where the program stands?
A little bit of both,
okay.
Right?
I think I was somewhere in between as well.
Yeah, because what you don't want, there's some programs who I think should be tier 1 programs, but they're not tier 1 programs right now. They might not even be tier 2, so you don't want to, just because of who we think they should be, you shouldn't be saying that. It's kind of this is what you should be, but also this is what you are. What's that place in the middle that describes where you're going to be, at least in 2025?
Right. Okay. Yeah, we're on the same page there then. So tier 6 bottom feeders, I had 2 teams. I had Purdue and Northwestern here. And Purdue is not in that like hot seat category. Obviously, it's a new coach, but they were so bad last year. Their only win was against an FCS team that I wonder, even with a new coach, how excited can you be about the program after what you just saw? And on top of which, their best years came under Jeff Brom, and he's having success at Louisville now. And you kind of sit there and you wonder, okay, that's a pretty good coach, right? How much of the success was just based on that coach and their program, that, or an athletic department that in general is struggling when it comes to NIL and things of that nature, right? Like, the basketball program is terrific, but Matt Painter is not one of the higher paid basketball coaches. They're not, they don't have a ton of NIL going towards their basketball team either, right? So you're looking at that athletic department, you're looking at that football program, wondering how prepared are you, even with a new coach, to be successful in this next era. On top of which, Barry Odom, we've seen him be a head coach at UNLV. He had success, but we've seen him be a head coach at the power conference level and not have success. So I just don't know where things stand. And based on what product they put on the field last year, I think it's hard to have any sense of hope until, they show otherwise. And Northwestern I put on there just because it's you never know with Northwestern, right? It goes either way. Some years they're, we've seen them from the Big Ten West get into the conference title game. Some years we've seen them be really bad. Last year they weren't very competitive. I just don't know where that program is right now. And maybe putting them as a bottom feeder was a bit harsh, but with the coaching change, with Fitzgerald leaving and the way he left and the way things look, I know they're doing some stadium renovations right now. What does that mean for revenue sharing and things of that nature that are coming into place soon? Like, that's a lot of money going into a stadium. I just don't know where they are, and I think I lean bottom feeder more than I lean toward thinking, okay, I don't know where they are, but maybe they're headed in the right direction. I don't think I lean that way yet with them.
So new coach for Purdue would be the only reason I would have even thought about putting them in the rebuilders category. But they are a historically bad football program. And that's part of the description, right? You're an historically bad, so there's no hope for you. And the best thing about their roster currently plays for the Ohio State Buckeyes and Mac Flair. They're not a good football team. They're not a good football program. And I'm not really sure what has to happen for that to change, because there are some programs where NIL and the transfer portal has maybe allowed you to be more fluid in what tier you're in. If we were to do a national one of these on a year-to-year basis, Purdue's not one of those teams. I just think they are. I mean, they didn't win a FBS game this year, past year. If they don't win an FBS game this upcoming year, I'm not going to be shocked. And so I don't know what you're building. To be rebuilding, there has to be something to be able to build. And there's really no football foundation at Purdue. They're a basketball school. That's just point blank. While with Northwestern, they're not even a basketball school. They're a journalism school.
They are.
In a law school. They are. If we were doing journalism tiers, they'd be tier 1. They'd be championship or bust. But it's another school where David Braun's in year 3. There, he went 8-5 in year 1, 4-8 in year 2. Purdue this past year, 1-11, 0-9. David Braun in year 2, 4-8, and 2-7. Excuse me. In the Big Ten. I just don't know if I'm expecting some big jump from them. I think in 2023, we saw the continuation of what the Northwestern experience was under Pat Fitzgerald on the field, where every so often they just pop and have a really good year, and you're like, whoa. And in the past, when you had divisions, Northwestern's playing in the Big Ten championship game, right? In 2020 and 2018, they get there. But now that that's not the case, I don't know. For starters, they're not in the weaker division, so I don't know how they map out a road to a Big Ten championship game. I think their ceiling is what we saw last year, 8-5 with the Las Vegas Bowl win. But I think in 2025 and just overall expectations, I'm with you. They're a tier 6 team. Those were not even – I wrote their names down and I kept going. And I started to go up to tier 5.
Those are the 2 programs that maybe hurt the most from divisions going away.
Yes. Yeah, because there's no path of, okay, we didn't get Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan as our crossovers this year. And the West is a constant crapshoot. So maybe we can – you can go 6-3 and somehow you end up in the Big Ten championship game. That road doesn't exist anymore. I'll kick off tier 5, our rebuilders. All 3 teams I have in this tier are coaches of teams where they're in year 2 of being coaches, one of which I'll start here. Jed Fish at Washington, 6-7 last year, 4-5 in the conference, and a Sun Bowl loss. I think that given what happened with Washington, Nick Saban's retirement, which means Kalen DeBoer leaves Washington for Alabama, they also lost a lot of draft picks after that 2023 season. I think Jed Fish maximized what Washington was going to be in 2024 and has at least set a foundation where it doesn't mean this year they're going to go 10-2. It doesn't mean they're even going to go 8-4. I don't know. Can they win 2 more games in 2025? I don't think that's off the table.
I don't think it's crazy. I don't have their schedule right in front of me, but I think they're in a pretty good spot where it would not surprise me if they made some sort of a jump. I know they have Ohio State on their schedule, which isn't easy, but Washington's probably the perfect example of when we get into this of being in tier 5 is for some programs maybe better than being in tier 4. Like Washington, you kind of know, okay, like things are going in the right direction. I think Fish is a good coach, so I think he's going to get them in a pretty good spot. And I think it wouldn't surprise me if over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, we see them, competing for a playoff spot. So I like the position that they're in. And yeah, Washington, I have them in my rebuilders tier with the understanding of they might be better than some of the teams in the tier ahead of them. It's just kind of where they fit more in the sense of like, you haven't really proven it yet, but I think we all see the direction this is going. And it's pretty promising.
Tier 5, you're not better than the teams in tier 4, but you have maybe more promise than the teams in tier 4. Maybe.
And you might be better than them when September arrives.
Yeah. I
or when
agree
October arrives. But as we sit in February, we think, but we don't know yet.
Which is why you have to keep them here. So I'm assuming you had Washington in tier 5.
Yeah, I did. I think we probably have the same tier 5 if you say your other 2 teams.
UCLA and Michigan State?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, yeah. Deshaun Foster in year 1 goes 5-7, 3-6. Jonathan Smith in year 1 goes 5-7 and 3-6. And their quarterback left for Michigan State. I think that's tough, right? Because I think Aiden Childs is a good quarterback. He's not an elite quarterback, obviously, but I thought there was something there that Jonathan Smith obviously took from Oregon State with him. I thought there was something, and maybe I should have Washington higher in the rebuilders tier than Michigan State, or maybe I shouldn't. But we saw Michigan State play this year. I didn't think they were terrible. I just thought they were in year 1 for a team who kind of got screwed a little bit by what happened with the Mel Tucker situation, because maybe there is a world that exists where if Mel Tucker doesn't have the off the field situation he has, maybe they're in the CFP or bust category this year, maybe, but now they're starting from scratch again. While with UCLA, it's another situation of that thing was in the dumpster fire even before Chip Kelly decided to leave, and so it's even more of a dumpster fire when you lose your freshman 5-star quarterback to Oregon. And so Deshaun Foster, who, remember, UCLA is in Los Angeles, that'll never not be funny. But I don't know what they are. And so there's no reason to doubt them, but there's also no reason to have a lot of confidence in what they are right now.
Yeah, I had UCLA and Michigan State with Washington in this tier, and Michigan State, I lean toward the rebuilders because, yeah, they're in a tough spot, but Jonathan Smith is a good coach. He had a lot of success at Oregon State, so I still think that if with time he can kind of get this going. We don't know what the finished product is with him yet. For me to say he's in no man's land, I think would be tough because he's in no man's land in the sense of he's trying to build it to a promising spot, as opposed to he's had time to build it and you still don't know where it is. With UCLA, it's an odd program because the expectations are low. I don't think anyone thinks very highly of them. You know, Foster didn't necessarily win over media days last year, and they weren't terrible this year. They had a stretch where they had wins against some of those no man land teams like Rutgers. They won at Rutgers. I think they were better than a lot of us. I think we kind of looked at it being like, this is a team that might go like 2-10, 3-9. They ended up going 5-7, and Foster, you know, kind of had them playing pretty hard at the end of the year. They had a game at LSU that went into the fourth quarter. I think it was tied going into the fourth quarter or something like that. Like, he actually wound up being a bit of a better coach this year than I think anyone expected. So him and Smith at Michigan State, they both kind of took over tough situations for different reasons. And they both kind of fielded teams where it's like, okay, you're competing at least with teams that maybe you shouldn't be competing with. Like, I think another thing with Purdue, why we have them in the bottom, is not only did they not beat an FBS team, but there was a lot of games. I mean, Indiana beat them by 60. Mm-hmm. Ohio State took it easy on them and beat the brakes off of them. Like, you weren't competitive in those games. UCLA was competitive against some pretty good teams and beat some pretty decent teams. They're at least in a decent spot where I think Foster has them playing hard, and they can maybe knock off a team that we don't expect them to.
Ohio State was out there experimenting with his defense while they were playing Purdue.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why they always score 45.
Speaking of bottom feeder teams, I was thinking about Northwestern as well, being like, Ohio State literally walked into that game was like, we want Carnell Tate to have a storyline, so we're just going to throw it to him. And it's like, that is how good Ohio State was last year, to where they could walk in to a Big Ten arena and be like, yeah, we're just going to, here's what we feel like doing today. Hey, Jeremiah, I know you could have 300 yards today, and you almost still had a one-handed catch. That would have been a highlight tape. But today, you know, Carnell, it's his hometown game. He's been through a lot. We're going to throw it to him today. Okay, we'll still win by 40.
Oh, yeah, and we're playing in a baseball stadium.
Yeah. Oh, and here's C.J. Hicks and Sonny Styles just unleashing on the quarterback out of nowhere.
Hey, bottom feeder teams, we're going to showcase our 2025 defense today. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, Mitchell Melton was raising hell against Purdue.
Yeah. So I guess I would say all these guys are on pace right now. I think they all kind of exceed. I mean, 6, 5, and 5 are their win totals. I think that's ahead of schedule this year, and we don't have to dive deep into these teams because obviously we don't cover them. But I don't know where Indiana's going to fall for you. They're not in tier 4 for me. Obviously, they just made the college football playoff. But I don't know if anybody thought Indiana was going to do what it did last year. Even if in hindsight, their schedule was easy once we realized they were good. But that's not an easy Indiana schedule given what their history is.
Indiana doesn't have a history of beating Maryland, Northwestern consistently, right?
Right. So in that world, I'm looking at Washington's schedule. Their schedule's kind of rough because I don't know if Michigan State can do it, but I'm looking at Washington's schedule. They've got they are playing a spring game, by the way, which is important to say now in this day and age. Colorado State, UC Davis, Washington State. They've got Ohio State at home, Maryland, Rutgers, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Purdue, UCLA, and Oregon. That's not really a schedule where I'm looking for a team who can Indiana this thing. I don't think they can necessarily do that because this is the tier that's going to come from. It's going to happen because I think we would have put Indiana in this tier if we were doing this a year ago.
Last year we might have had them in the bottom feeders tier.
Right. And yet they did what they did. Michigan State's got Western Michigan, Boston College, Youngstown State, USC, Nebraska, UCLA, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Penn State, and Iowa. So it does kind of get rocky at the end there, but at least I think up through October 11th, Michigan State as the rebuilders team, and we got to see what their team looks like, obviously, which is why we said this is a way too early version of this. But at least the first 6 games there is a path where they might be undefeated heading into Indiana, and that could be a top 25 game because you're looking for people to put at the bottom of your ballot.
Yeah, it could happen. We can move to tier 4 because I think I have a team that might actually have an Indiana type schedule to make a run.
Okay, let's do that.
Tier 4, the first team I'll mention, just because I want to talk about them for this conversation, is Maryland. I have them in the no man's land because they're a program that's had some success, had some highs, but last year was pretty rough. And Lachlan got mentioned in the New York Jets coaching search, which we can kind of call that what it is. We know what happened there. But go look at Maryland's schedule. Do you have it pulled up?
I'm pulling it up right now.
Well, I have it pulled up. I could go ahead.
Go ahead.
Their non-con is Florida Atlantic, Northern Illinois, and Towson, which we can't overlook Northern Illinois. But then you go into the Big Ten: Wisconsin, Washington, Nebraska, UCLA, Indiana, Rutgers, Illinois, Michigan, Michigan State. So they avoid the Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State trio, which is easier than what Indiana had. Indiana last year had to play Ohio State and Michigan. Maryland's toughest opponents are Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana.
And if you think Indiana's going to come back to the mean a little bit this year.
Right. And that's at Maryland. It's the same conversation that we had with Indiana. Indiana could do it, but they had to be better than they were. Maryland can do it, but they cannot. If they're as bad as they were last year, they're going to lose against Nebraska at home if they're as bad as they were last year. But can you feel the roster that's competitive enough to where those wins we can pencil in as wins for Maryland?
So Maryland last year, they go 4-8 and 1-8 in the conference. They were really bad last year.
Yeah.
That's not good. That's not good at all. Mike Locksley's been there since 2019. He also was in an interim role back in 2015 as Maryland's head coach, but starting in 2019, 3-9, 1-8, 2-3, 2-3, 7-6, 3-6. Okay. Starting to cook a little bit. 8-5, 4-5 in back-to-back years. Okay. We're in this. You seem like a team who's going to benefit from the fact that you don't have to play Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State every single year. And then you go 4-8 and 1-8 in the conference, and you finish second to last in the conference at 17. I call this the no man's land tier. You're just fine. Not really bad enough for it to be a disaster. Not really good enough for it to get the fan base excited. Maryland is the epitome of that, literally. They're just kind of there. And last year, it kind of bottomed out a little bit. I think if I were to pick another name for this tier, I think it would be now or never, but not now or never the way we talk about Ohio State winning national championships. Right? Now or never has levels to this. It's more now or never of like, okay, what are you, dude? Are you going to be a competitive team in the Big Ten or are you not? Because there does come a point where you stop taking a program seriously. And I think no man's land is where you're at when we stop taking you seriously because you're just kind of there. Every so often, you're going to annoyingly make the game competitive. So now we have to wait till the fourth quarter to write our stories. And, they're playing Ohio State and Jeremiah Smith has to be out there with 4 minutes left in the game when we all came into the game thinking JJ is going to be watching from the sideline after the first series of the third quarter. That is what Maryland is to me. And so I agree. Tier 4 team you're right. This is the year. You just mapped out the schedule. If they're going to do something more, this is kind of the year to do it, where you've got some good teams in November, but everybody does. That's, the contenders are made in November. We know that. But at least if you don't head into November, I think your floor needs to be 5-2. The first 2 months. If you're not going to do that because you're going to play Wisconsin, Washington, and Nebraska, I think they're going to beat UCLA, though. I kind of like what Deshaun Foster's doing. But if you can't get out of October and go into your bye on October 25th and come back on November 1st and play Indiana, if you're not 5-2 heading into that game, this is it. This is
right.
I'm going to put them in the bottom feeder the next year simply because I'm tired of looking at Maryland.
Yeah, and we don't have to look at comparing it to Indiana's run in the sense of you have to go 11-1 and make the playoff, but you can go 9-3, 10-2, and that's a great run from a team that was just second to last in the Big Ten, like you mentioned.
Right.
Yeah. The thing about no man's land and the other 3 teams fit this perfectly too, of just like you can be as good as 10-2 sniffing the playoff, but we also worry that you could be as bad as 1-8, not even be competing. And that's literally Maryland the last 2 years. That's Maryland.
Okay, so you've only got 3 other teams in this tier.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a break because this is where I think the conversation starts. So far, our tier 6 is Purdue and Northwestern. Our tier 5, we agree, is UCLA, Michigan State, and Washington. And so far, we've agreed on one tier 4 team, and that's Maryland with Mike Locksley heading into year 7. We're going to take a quick break here, and then we'll start to delineate because I have 5 teams in tier 4, and Stefan has 4. So we'll get into that when we come back from the break here on Buckeye Talk.
Every cup of Nespresso coffee is an invitation to transform your morning routine into a ritual you can treasure each and every day. Using the Virtuo Pop, a simple touch of the button freshly brews bold aromas and a rich, velvety crema layer for delicious cafe-quality coffee at home. Whether you enjoy your coffee hot or over ice, every sip, every morning is unforgettable. Nothing tastes like Nespresso coffee. Visit Nespresso.com or our app to explore our full range of easy-to-use machines and coffees not found anywhere else.
So good, so good, so good.
Great brands, great prices. Everyone's got a reason to rack.
Because they have framed jeans.
Nike? Yes.
Just so many good brands.
Vince, Kurt Geiger London, Rag & Bone, and more are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. You never know what you'll find, but you know it's going to be so good. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
And we're back here on Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means and Stefan Krajisnik. This is your Leave No Doubt pod, and we finally got some doubt. We got some doubt. I have more doubt in the team than Stefan has. So, okay, where do we agree? So far, we've got Maryland in tier 4. I'm assuming you have Rutgers.
Yep.
In tier 4? Okay. Cool. So we can, because I don't know if I want to have that much of a conversation. Greg Schiano's a really good coach. It's just
the conversation we just had about Maryland, it's the same about Rutgers.
It is. Yes, it's the same conversation. It's just, we think Schiano's a better coach than Mike Locksley. This is year 6 for him, 17th overall if you include back in the day. They went 7-6 and 4-5 in the conference, and they lost in the Rate Bowl. Okay, Minnesota.
Yes,
with Fleck in year 9, tier 4.
No man.
I think PJ Fleck has missed his window to be more. I think they're tier 4 and regressing. Went 8-5. 5-4. They won in the Mayo Bowl, but I don't know. I felt like they were a victim of COVID, where in 2019 they had that really good year and you thought they'd build on it, and then obviously things stagnated, and then they kind of pushed Ohio State to the brink in that season opener in 2021, and it's just been kind of downhill ever since then.
Yeah, I wonder what this conversation looks like if they had beaten Penn State last year, because they were in that game until late in the fourth quarter. Remember that? That was a game where. If they had lost that game, Penn State probably isn't in the playoff.
Penn State doesn't make the playoff. Minnesota's in tier 3.
Yep.
That's a program staple win for Minnesota. Okay. I've got Wisconsin and USC in your tier 4. So which one of those is?
I have Wisconsin. I don't have USC in there. And you might be surprised where I have USC, but that's where I started to delineate between expectations versus where you should be versus what the program expectations are versus our expectations. That's where it got fuzzy. Let's talk about Wisconsin first then, because there is some Ohio State tie there. They just gave Luke Fickell an extension, which I think caught everyone by surprise. It was just a 1-year extension through the 2031 season. I don't know who they were fighting off, and they're kind of in this no man's land too, because I don't know what they are, man. And this is the thing where with Fickell going into last season, we probably have them in this rebuilding tier of, there's promise. He's going into his second year.
Yeah.
This is kind of what Jonathan Smith is about to face at Michigan State. Like, okay, we think you're rebuilding. You might be onto something here. If year 2 is a dud, then you're quickly in a no man's land. And now we're talking hot seat in the near future. If things don't start turning, right? If things start regressing or just kind of stay the same. And that's where it feels like Fickell is with this Wisconsin program. I think when he got the job, I think people viewed it as maybe easier than it actually was. Just because I think we view Wisconsin football in a tier that maybe it's not quite in yet historically, but we kind of think it is just because there's some name recognition there. Yeah. So I think people saw, Fickell, he won at Cincinnati. He's immediately going to have success with Wisconsin. Given the NIL era, and it hasn't been that way. It's kind of felt like they've had an identity crisis. Like, I don't know what they want to do on offense, because I think they tried to be more 21st century offense than Wisconsin has usually been. And I think they reached a point where they're like, wait, we're Wisconsin. We have to go back to this. And their quarterback situation has been a mess since Vickell's been there. I don't know. They are perfectly in no man's land, because I have no idea what to expect from them going into the season. And I think he's a good coach.
I think he did what they did last year 2 years earlier than their talent pool was ready to do it. Like, I get it. You want to throw it at a place that's never thrown it, but you're like 2 recruiting classes away from being able to throw it the way you want to throw it. And so you should have been recruiting that way, but not necessarily playing that way in year one, or at least make better decisions in the transfer portal. Because now, granted, their quarterback got hurt, so that doesn't help. But they didn't. I don't think their personnel was good enough to do what they were trying to do last year, and it just wasn't set up that way.
Their schedule is hell this year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is, which is why he signed that. It's also why he signed that extension, because
we're looking at like 4-8 here,
which is super. Like 7-6, 5-7, 4-8. That's going backwards. You can't put them in the bottom feeders because they're not historically bad. But to the point you were making of, I think we're putting Wisconsin in a tier they don't deserve to be in. It's because of divisions. And so they got to play in all those Big Ten championship games. So we have assumed that Wisconsin's a better job than it actually is. And maybe it is. Maybe we're just young guys who are speaking as young guys who don't know any better. But you said it earlier with some of these other teams where we said it with Northwestern and Purdue, where they are some of the teams who were hurt most by the lack of divisions. I think Wisconsin's at the top of that list because Wisconsin has so many years where they didn't have to find out how good they were until they got to Indianapolis the first week of December. And now they have to find that out for 3 months throughout the season. Getting one game worse every single year is not great. Because, look, I mean, his first full year, because he won the bowl game in 2022, but we're not going to count that. They were second in the Big Ten West in 2023. So that's where all the promise comes from. Then you get rid of divisions, and all of a sudden being second in the Big Ten West means you're tied for 12th in the Big Ten overall. So, okay, we agree on Wisconsin. We agree on Minnesota. We agree on Maryland, and we agree on Rutgers. Okay. Where's USC for you?
I'm skipping a tier. I have them in playoff or bust. And
whoa, let's talk about it.
If Lincoln Riley in year 3 at USC isn't in the playoff, that's a bust of a season. And is it realistic? Like, do either of us think they're getting to the playoff? No, not at all.
No.
But if in year 3 he's still in no man's land, then now we're talking hot seat. So this is where it goes between, do I think they're a playoff or bust team roster? No. But do I think that's what their expectations are? I think it has to be. Otherwise, what are we doing here? The Miller Moss experiment failed, and now he's gone.
I wasn't prepared for you to go all the way there with it. And maybe I should have been, because it's USC, man. It's a freaking blue blood. You're right. Tier 2 should be their floor.
Right.
They should never be less than Tier 2. And yet they've been less than Tier 2 even before Lincoln Riley showed up, which is why when he was at Big Ten Media Days telling all those answers of, listen, you don't understand how bad this program was before I got here and how we had to update about stuff, the facilities and, and all that stuff. And he got me back on board. I was like, okay, you're right. USC has been, and I don't feel sorry for USC. They went this route. They decided to stop, caring about football. And you can stop it. It's a lot going on in LA, right? You got the Dodgers, you got the Lakers, the Clippers are moving to a new arena. The Rams and the Chargers are sharing an arena now. There's a bunch happening in Los Angeles that it's very easy to not care about USC football if it's not cool, which is what made Pete Carroll so awesome, is because he made USC football cool. And they were also winning championships. No one has been able to do that. Lane Kiffin tried. He had one good year of it. He went 10-2. Well, he went 10-4 one year. But no, actually he didn't. 3 different coaches went 10-4 that year. Ed Orgeron, Clay Helton, and Lane Kiffin all played a role in that. You bring in Steve Sarkisian, who was a big part of why Pete Carroll was doing what he was doing all those years. And obviously, real life happened, the alcohol issues happened, and it seems like he's bounced back from that. I don't think he was a bad hire from a football standpoint. It's just you're human beings. You have to deal with their human being situations as well. Clay Helton, things started off pretty well, 10-3, 11-3, and then that went to, dumpster fire. They went 11-3 in year one and won the Heisman Trophy. I don't know how this went downhill so quickly. And Oklahoma sucks too, so it's not like Oklahoma won the breakup. Nobody won the breakup.
Both teams lost the breakup.
Yeah, maybe they should come back together.
This is year 4 for Riley. I said year 3. It's year 4.
Yeah, it's year 4. Year 2 in the Big Ten, year 4 overall. Okay, so we're just listing these. We're not going to come to an agreement with these. I think we do that a lot. I think it's fine for us to be able to share our different opinions in a pod like this, especially because I think we'll probably do this again sometime in the middle of the season just to see how different we think things are and how we have real tangible results. And I don't want to just like lock us into like, oh, we thought this. Like, no, Steven thought this. Or no, Stefan thought that. So like, why would I have us both agree? But if we were doing that on this pod, we would have to come to a middle ground at tier 3. Because, I can't have them in tier 2. I just can't have them in tier 2 with the teams I have in tier 2. But I get it. You leaned more on what the expectation for a blue blood program should be.
Yeah.
Where at worst, they should be playoff or bust. I do agree with that sentiment. I also think that college football is changing a lot. And so there are some historic elements that still matter. Rivalry week still matters, right? But there's some things that are changing, and we can't do the old money, new money thing. I often hate that, the old money, new money thing, and that's what's happened. That's why Oregon's so intriguing, is that they're the new money team who's like trying to pull up a seat to the table but act like they don't want a seat at the table. But if we were to do a pod where you and I sat here and we decided who are the actual blue bloods of college football, of modern day college football right now, I don't think USC is at the table anymore. I think Oregon would be at the table at that point. And so that's how I saw it is, yeah, I know what you should be, but you're not. And you haven't been for a long, long time. And Lincoln Riley, that experiment is failing. So why would I put you in that tier when it seems like, yes, you should be in that tier, but you are choosing to not know what it is you want to do with your program. And you look like a blue blood, but you're acting like a no man's land team.
Yeah, I think that's what's tough about that job too, is that here's why I think we have such a gap. Right? Like if it was like I had them in tier 3, you had them in tier 4, people would be like, okay, that's not a huge gap. Tier 2 and tier 4 is a pretty big gap.
Yeah.
He has a tough job where he has to make people in LA care about USC football.
Mm-hmm.
And if they go 9-3 and 8-4, I don't think you can look at it in the same way of Illinois or Indiana or Iowa going 8-4 and be like, okay, like they got some things figured out. Like people are not going to be happy. They're not going to care. So that's where I struggle, where I think in terms of football and how good they're going to be this year, I think they are in this no man's land of, I could see them being really bad. I could see them maybe being pretty good, and we just don't really know. But I think there's a like Minnesota, if they go 9-3 out of no man's land, you're thinking, okay, BJ is doing something right. It's with Lincoln Riley. If you go 9-3, 8-4, I think people are saying that it's a bust of a season. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe at the national level, we're saying, okay, Lincoln Riley he steadied the boat a bit. 2026 is now playoff or bust. Maybe that's more fair, but I don't know. I just don't know how people are going to react, at least in the USC bubble, if they're 7-5 this year. They have a tough schedule because they play Notre Dame. I think, you know what a huge game on the calendar is this year? It's October 11th, Michigan at USC. I think that's a huge game. That's going to determine which one of these programs is serious right now with the coach that they have in place.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was a pretty big game this past year for both programs too. It was kind of a swing game for both programs.
That is an intriguing game. People aren't going to care if they go 8-4. That's a good point. This is fall 2025. And obviously the schedule for the NBA season next year is not out yet, so we don't know this. But your options are it's November 8th, 2025. Actually, no, because Northwestern's a bottom feeder. It's November 15th, 2025. And Iowa's coming to town, who might be ranked in the top 25. USC, at that point, that'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games into the year. Let's just say they've lost to Illinois, Michigan, and Notre Dame, because that's 3 games in a row with a bye week in between the Illinois and Michigan game. So they're 6-3 heading into that Iowa game. And you've got a choice as a LA sports fan. I'm a season ticket holder to USC, but I'm also a season ticket holder to the Los Angeles Lakers. This is a very rich person.
I mean, he lives in LA.
Yeah, that alone. And hey, you can go watch USC play a ranked opponent for a game that's probably going to be 6 o'clock Eastern time, because they play a lot of their games.
Yeah.
If it's a noon game, and then 9 o'clock Eastern time if it's a night game. Or I can go watch LeBron and Luka. At 6-3, I'm going to watch LeBron and Luka. At 8-1, I might go watch Iowa and USC.
Right.
And that's your point. That's why I understand why you put them in tier 2, because that's the reason why. 8-1, 6-3 Minnesota people care. Even if the option is Anthony Edwards or 6-3 Minnesota. 6-3 USC versus LeBron and Luka. I'm going to, first of all, I'm not calling it crypto. It's Staples Center for the rest of my life. You're going to Staples that night. Fine. I also understand that I am completely out on the Lincoln Riley experience.
I think it's going to be a bust.
Yeah, but you're still responsible about your I'm out. I'm like, no, this team sucks. This program's a dumpster fire. Get them out of here. So I respect it. And
I think another big thing, you talking about LA specifically and the Luka LeBron thing, Caleb Williams helped because
yes.
Do you want to go watch 6-3 USC? It helps when that guy just won the Heisman. I want to watch that guy because he's about to be the number 1 pick. Lincoln Riley has to have success at the quarterback position this year if he wants to not only have success on the field, but also start to draw some of those eyeballs in as well.
And if you don't have that, at least have something exciting for people to hold on to. And the most exciting thing about the USC program now lives in Athens, Georgia, and that's Zachariah Branch. And that's because he's super, super fast.
Yeah.
I don't know what right now, and again, way too early, I don't know what the exciting thing about USC. If I covered USC and someone told me to write a story where the headline is, here's why you should watch the USC Trojans in 2025, I don't know whose picture I would use if I'm not allowed to use Lincoln Riley's face. So that's tier 4. We agreed on all but one. Stefan put USC in tier 2. So let's go up to tier 3. Our up-and-comers are 1 year away. I'm going to start with your Indiana Hoosiers.
I'm with you.
And last year was great. What a year for the Undaunted. 11-2, 8-1 in the conference. You lost in the first round of the college football playoff in a road game to the team who lost in the national championship game. So their 2 losses were to the teams who played for the national. That's Kirk Cignetti year 1. They are, clip this, Undaunted people, because if I'm putting you guys in my top 15 in my AP poll in November, I know you guys love me, but also, give me some crap if I'm wrong about this. They're going to regress to the mean a little bit.
Yeah.
I think last year was a combination of some really good additions in the transfer portal, some excellent coaching, and a very, very favorable schedule. Their schedule is not as favorable in 2025 as it was in 2024, while also the downside of transfer portal hunting is that you're typically bringing in a bunch of old guys who have played football before, which means you are having to reset your roster a ton. And that's what Indiana has to do this year. So starting with the first 3 weeks of the season, Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, and Indiana State, that's 3-0. Illinois, Iowa, Oregon, and then Penn State on the back end. Those are 4 games where if they lose them, I'm not going to be like, shame on Indiana for having a disappointing season. In fact, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. They lost those 4 games. But it's at least this type of schedule where, what if they've built a level of confidence where maybe they pull an upset or 2? And that's why I have them in the 1 year away, because I don't think in 2025 they get back on the playoff stage, but I think they could set themselves up to get back on the playoff stage in 2026.
Yeah, I'm in the exact spot with you. I think most people, you'd kind of look surface level and you would put Indiana in that playoff or bust schedule because, if you don't make the playoff next year, it's viewed as regressing. There has to be some historical context here. And being picked to finish last or second to last in the Big Ten last year and making the playoff doesn't automatically mean that you're a perennial power who's making the playoff every year. And I can speak, from a personal level and just the amount of people I know who went to Indiana, have connections to Indiana. If IU goes 8-4, 9-3 this year, people are not going to view it as a disappointing season. I mean, back to back, 18 wins across, 19 wins across 2 seasons is maybe the most successful run in Indiana football history. So I think they are in this tier of, can you show to me that you can stay consistently at like 8+ wins? Because if you're consistently at 8-4-ish, which is kind of where we see Iowa, then I can believe next year that, okay, maybe you make a jump and you make the playoff. If you can raise your floor, I think that's where you kind of start, being talked about as a playoff team, more often than not, or at least in that conversation preseason. So in Indiana, I have in year 3 of just, can you show me that your floor is higher than it's usually been?
I like this schedule. I hate the fact that it's Illinois, Iowa, bye week, Oregon. Like, that's a rough 4-week stretch. Yeah. But maybe you'd want those a little sprinkled out. I think Ohio State the last 2 years has had the most ideal schedule, and I think they have an ideal one this year where it's play a hard game, figure it out. 3 games later, play a hard game, figure it out. 3 games later, play a hard game, figure it out. And that's just not what Indiana's schedule this year. It's 3 games of figure it out, play a hard game, come up for air, play a hard game, play an interesting game like it's Michigan State, and then UCLA, Maryland, and then play a hard game. It's just a weird schedule. Okay.
Yeah, if they can go if they can find a way to go 2-2 against Illinois and then road games against Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State, we might be talking about them as a playoff team again.
And like a legit playoff team that
you would have a win at Iowa would be an impressive win. That's a tough place to play, pretty decent team. Sure. Yeah. And Illinois is going to be ranked too. And then, I mean, if one of those upsets is against Penn State and Oregon, that's a whole nother conversation.
That game's on the 27th. Let me see who Ohio State play. No, never mind.
That's the Seattle game.
Yeah, I know. I wonder if NBC tries to take that Iowa-Indiana game. If they're both what they're supposed to be the first couple of weeks, I wonder if that's like an interesting primetime game. In a week where I don't think Ohio State's playing anybody. I mean, they are, but we don't know what Washington is yet, so that's not a notable game yet. And I think Oregon is playing... No, never mind. Oregon and Penn State play each other on the 27th. Never mind.
That'll be... Is it at Oregon or at Penn State?
It's at... Ooh, it's at Beaver Stadium.
Yeah. It's old Big Noon, baby.
Big Noon in it, baby. We know how this goes.
That's going to be Big Noon, and then Ohio State Washington will be the night game on NBC.
Oh, Disney Live.
CBS might do like Indiana, Iowa then.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a good one, though, for that. Penn State fans are going to be so pissed. It's like, are you serious?
Bill Landis, if you're listening, we apologize.
It's a top 7 matchup, and we're playing it at 12 o'clock. Okay, tier 3. I've got 3 teams. I think you might have these 3 teams. Though there is one team that I don't have in it that I'm wondering if you do have them here. I've got Nebraska, Illinois, and we already mentioned Indiana. I've also got Nebraska and Illinois here. Matt Rule in year 3 went 7-6 last year, 3-6 with a Pinstripe Bowl win. And I've got Illinois with Brett Bielema in year 5. They went 10-3 last year and won the Cheez-It Bowl. They beat South Carolina.
There's a few of them still listening. A few of them are still listening.
Yeah, it has to be. That was such a... I've never been more validated than watching that game. It was wonderful. It was mwah for me. I don't know, man. Matt Rule, second year of a 5-star quarterback as your starter. He's kind of gotten used to college football this year. I think Dylan Raiola should put them in a position where going into year... If he takes another step this year and they're knocking on the door, in 2026, one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the 2024 class, who is now in his 3rd year as a starting quarterback, should make a college football playoff while he's in college. I don't think that's unrealistic to ask a 5-star quarterback who's a 3-year starter to make a college football playoff at least once. So maybe it's not this year, but maybe it's next year. Well, Brett Bielema, 9-3, and then you won a 10th game in a bowl game against an SEC team, who I think we both think might be a top 10 team next year in South Carolina. Who they were just young. They were a year away last year, which is why Gamecocks fans need to chill. This is your year. I think Nebraska, Illinois, and Indiana should all be looking at this season and going, let's put the fear in some people.
I'm with you on Nebraska. I think Nebraska and Indiana are in this tier for me.
Oh, yeah.
Because, so here's the thing on Nebraska. They kind of need to be this year what South Carolina was last year.
Yes.
And then I think 2025 for Rayola and Nebraska needs to set up a 2026 Heisman campaign and a 2026 playoff campaign
Yes.
for Nebraska. That's what 2025 needs to set up 2026 for them. I think we're in line with that. Indiana, we're in line with. We talked about that. I don't have Illinois in this tier, but I have Iowa in this tier.
Okay, see, I said that we're not going to do the thing where we have to come to an agreement, but I am willing here to be talked off of my ledge because I had Iowa in my tier 2.
On playoff or bust?
Yes.
Because
you've been there for 27 years, dude.
Yeah.
They should have made the playoff last year. They dropped the ball.
Yeah.
That's on them. And I feel like they do that every year. Iowa should have been a team who had more wins than they actually ended up having. Illinois 10-3 with Cheez-It Bowl win. Iowa 8-5, 6-3 in the conference. And they lost in the Music City. They were the only team in the Big Ten who played an SEC team in the postseason and lost. Because again, they keep doing this thing. So it is kind of like, all right, Kirk, in year 27, do something.
I really are Iowa donors just fine with what the product is?
I guess.
That's why I struggle. I struggle to put them in playoff and bust because I feel like if you don't make the playoff, there are consequences in that tier.
And that's why I was willing to get talked off the list. That's a good point.
What if Iowa goes 8-4 next year? What? It's like if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to see it. Did it make a noise? I don't know. Iowa fans are just they got the OC fired a couple years ago. That was Iowa fans getting up there and making change happen.
National championship win.
And I'm like, well, dude, you've had the what about the head coach? Any thoughts of change? They're just fine with where that is.
Father? Okay, I'm convinced. You said the magic words. There's consequences in tier 2, in tier 1. There's not really consequences in tier 3 because it's almost like it's a buzz year. You're creating the year that's going to have consequences when you're in tier 3. When you're in tier 2, you already created that year. Now you need to go do something with it. What's Illinois' schedule? Because I might put them back down in tier 3. Okay, Duke. Western Illinois is a win. That's an FCS school. Duke should be a W, but it's the type of win because it's at Duke. So it's the type of game where a school in Illinois position, this is where very early on we're going to know if they're even something we should even consider or not. Western Michigan's a win. At Indiana.
That's a big game for them.
It's a really big game for them.
Big game for both teams.
Yep. I think that's a really big game for both sides. USC at home, that's a dub. It shouldn't be, but it is. Purdue, dub. Ohio State at home. I don't think it's a win, but I think they can play that out the way Nebraska played out the game this past year, where Ohio State was kind of messing around with some stuff, so they didn't necessarily get it done. In fact, who does Ohio State play the week before that? That's October 11th, and Ohio State plays Minnesota the week before that, so that's the problem. Ohio State's not playing anybody who might force them to rethink their entire offense or defense. They've got to bye. You and I watched football this year. At Washington, Rutgers at home. They've got 2 byes this year, and they got another bye after those 2 games. I don't like that. Maryland, Wisconsin, Northwest. Okay, yeah, they're 2-2. That's the Indiana schedule.
It's the Indiana schedule. You're bringing back your quarterback. You just had a good year. And I don't mean – and the consequences can be different in the playoff or bust tier. With USC, if you don't make the playoff, maybe the bust is the coach really gets on the hot seat. I don't think Brett's on the hot seat if they don't make the playoff. But you've brought back a good amount of your roster for this to be the year that you make the playoff. And if you don't, the consequence might be you're going to need 3 or 4 years to get back to this point.
Yes. And that is the difference, I think, between a lot of these teams you're going to talk about in tier 1 at the top of tier 2 and the teams who are tier 3 and bottom of tier 2 is, for some of these teams, it's more of a every year you live on that hot white light, while Illinois, Indiana, Nebraska, just because of what they are, Wisconsin, even a lot of these teams in the no man's land, you have to spend 2, 3, 4 years building up to your shot. So it is kind of more now or never. Because if you don't do it now, you've got to wait till the stars align again when you get a favorable schedule where you don't have to play anybody. They're playing one of the big 4 this year. And it's the type of game where if you just don't get your butt kicked and you keep it close, Indiana made the playoff. And that was a one-sided game. And Indiana made the playoff because it was their only loss. But I don't know when the next time Illinois has a schedule that's both this favorable while also having a team that's good enough to actually maximize it. So that's their consequence. Either do it this year or you're not going to do it again for another 4. While for other teams, it's like either do it this year or you're getting a pink slip. You've convinced me. I put Iowa back down in tier 3 and Illinois in tier 2. But their bust is with a bit of a little asterisk. It's not the same. Mm-hmm. Let's take our last break.
Oh, do you not have any more teams in tier 2?
I do.
Okay.
But they're a conversation.
Okay.
Because we've got 14. We got the big 4 left. And I've got 2 of them in tier 2 and 2 of them in tier 1.
Ooh. Okay.
But I don't think we're going to be completely aligned with all of them. Or maybe I'll be shocked if we were. So let's take a break and then we'll get to that here on Buckeye Talk.
This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian makes the team collaboration software that powers enterprise businesses around the world, including over 80% of the Fortune 500. With Atlassian's AI-powered software like Jira, Confluence, and Loom, you'll have more time to do the work that matters. In fact, Atlassian customers experience a 25% reduction in project duration per year. Unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.
I think I just won my taxes.
Yeah?
I just switched to H&R Block in about 1 minute. All I had to do was drag and drop last year's return into H&R Block, and bam, my information is automatically there.
So I don't have to go digging around for all my old papers to switch?
Nope.
Sounds like we just leveled up our tax game.
Switching to H&R Block is easy. Just drag and drop your last return. It's better with Block.
And we're back here on Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means and Stefan Krajisnik. We are tiering the Big Ten teams heading into 2025. It's a mixture of kind of like what they should be as programs and also what we actually think they're going to be in 2025. I'm not moving USC up from tier 4, but the more I think about it and the more we talk about other teams, I completely understand why they're in tier 2 for you, because there are consequences and there's something that has to be done about Lincoln Riley if they don't get it done this year.
The other teams coordinator job.
I mean, yeah, in the NFL.
I've seen a coach from LA come be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State.
Yeah, and now he's OC. I'm just saying, yeah. The other 4 teams I had in tier 4, I don't know if anything's going to happen with them after this year, which is why they're in no man's land, because you're not really going to fire the guy, but also, I mean, maybe he leaves on his own and just goes into the NFL or does the Chip Kelly thing, as you just mentioned, but the university is not going to do anything about them.
Yeah.
USC might have to do something about Lincoln Riley. So I'm not moving him up because I have to continue to hammer my point home, but I understand.
It could be maybe it's 1 year too early from playoff or bust for them, but we'll see.
No. I think you're right. I think they're there, man. Like, what are you doing? What are we doing here? We're the only blue blood who is not even showing a lick of promise. Oklahoma had a bad year because they chose the wrong quarterback, but they had been pretty decent before this year. But it is kind of the same thing with Oklahoma with their head coach. It's like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Well, the blue bloods don't have patience the same way that everybody else does. Ask Texas. It took them a decade to figure it out. Now they're in the college football playoff every year. So I'll put Michigan CFP or bust because I can't go from last year was a rebuilding year all the way up to Natty or bust.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Sharon has to just get them to the playoff this year for fans to be like, okay, he's the guy that can get us back to where Harbaugh had them.
They're almost a combination of CFP and bust and 1 year away, because I think in 2026 they should be in the Natty or bust conversation.
Yeah.
especially since they're literally going to do what Nebraska just spent this year doing, is that they're just more talented than Nebraska. They're going to start a 5-star quarterback as a true freshman.
Yeah, the quarterback situation will be interesting. Where if Bryce is playing really well and they go like 8-4, 9-3, they don't make the playoff, but he's good and he's legit, then it's probably not viewed as like, oh, this was a failure of a season. But you gotta at least be in that conversation.
They're also they're more talented than Nebraska.
Yeah.
So their floor, even with a true freshman at quarterback, has to be higher.
Right.
Nebraska going 7-6 with a true freshman quarterback with that base of talent versus Michigan, that's 9-3 as their floor.
Right.
Because they went 8-5 without the 5-star. They went 8-5 and beat Ohio State on the road while playing us at quarterback. And beat Bama, by the way, who has a quarterback who is probably a second-round draft pick at worst. Like, the Browns might take Jalen Milroe. So, just saying, it's a pretty good rebuilding year for Michigan. Kudos to them.
That's it for my tier 2. It's not it for
I
yours.
I know. I don't want to do it yet. I'll come back to it. Let's start with Penn State. They're in tier 1 because they're literally doing what Michigan did in 2023 and what Ohio State did in 2024. They're bringing back a bunch of guys. They also just brought in Stan Drayton as their new running backs coach. So literally like Ohio State, they went and got a new running back coach.
Yep.
Okay, James. You got to the CFP semis. Your 5-star quarterback, who is going to be in year 3, put off the NFL where, I don't know, man. Would the Browns have taken them at number 2? Probably not.
They'd probably think about it.
Hometown kid, 5-star guy. I don't know.
Listen, I mentioned Josh Rosen on a pod.
I don't know.
I've seen worse.
They got the best running back duo in college football. Now, you lost Abdul, so you lost your version of Marvin Harrison Jr., and you didn't really replace him with your version of Jeremiah Smith. But I think the other guy, Denai Sutton.
Jim Knowles.
Yeah. Speaking of things you're repeating from Ohio State's world, Jim Knowles, you got an elite defensive secondary. I think Denai Dennis Sutton is still there as well. So that's going to be one of the 5 best defenses in college football. They are the ultimate natty or bust. Because I don't know when James Franklin's going to have a roster that's as good as last year. He's heading into year 12. He went 13-3 and got to the CFP semis, where his only loss was still a national champion in the Big Ten. And he got to the Big Ten championship game. I don't think they're going to do it, but for the sake of this pod, we have to put them in tier 1.
If they don't win a natty, I think their fans are going to be disappointed. That's what this offseason's been building for. I want to ask you a Jim Knowles question.
Go ahead.
He came to Ohio State and he inherited a bad defense. And it was, he talked so much to you guys about and to us about this last year of, he felt like by year 3, it was going to be a system and he'd be really running it the way he wanted to. Does it concern you a little bit that Penn State's natty or bust year comes with him being in his first season there, as opposed to having had a couple of years there?
I guess the defense wasn't great in 2021 at Ohio State, but it was still natty or bust. That's just what they are at the program. And, they were a field goal away from winning a national championship in 2022. Yes, because I think the terminology and the X's and O's of his defense is why it takes 3 years. Like, here are the numbers by year: points per game from year 1 to year 3. They were 24th in the nation, 2nd in the nation, 1st in the nation. Yards per play, 37th in the nation, 3rd in the nation, 1st in the nation. Passing yards per attempt, tied for 66th in the nation, 1st in the nation, tied for 5th in the nation. Rushing yards per attempt, they were 25th in the nation, 22nd in the nation, 2nd. And that's with a bunch of dudes who we're getting ready to go talk to this week, who are about to get drafted.
Yeah.
Penn State's got that too. So maybe it's sped up a little bit more because this is a defense that's already elite before Jim Knowles got here. But the terminology and the X's and O's do kind of take a little bit of time. So I am... What's Penn State's schedule? I do have some concerns that maybe the first couple of weeks of the season aren't pretty. And it takes it doesn't click until the Ohio State game. Like, does Oregon beat them on the 27th?
What happens if Penn State loses to Oregon?
And what happens if it looks the exact same way that Penn State beat Ohio State? Or for whatever reason, your elite secondary didn't show up and your elite defensive line wasn't getting home.
Because if they lose to Oregon at home and they lose at Ohio State in November, you're at 2 losses. You can't afford a third loss, and Indiana's coming to town.
And you're the same team you've been. Yeah. Which was where we were with Ohio State after November 30th. Is you're the same team you've been for 3 years.
Do you worry that all the hype about what they bring back is just bringing back what they've always been?
Yes, but you could have said
they brought back their running backs. They didn't bring back Marv or Jeremiah.
Yeah, like what's the best? Who's the best? Their best receiver for Drew Aller is still their running backs.
Right.
I guess you could have said the same thing about Ohio State at this point last year, and the same thing about Michigan at this point 2 years ago, going into those years. Oh, you're bringing all this. You're bringing dudes who come back who weren't doing anything. So, like, what does it matter? But eventually, eventually you turn the page. But I just don't know if I trust Penn State to turn the page. So it's Natty or bust, but neither one of us believe that it's going to be the former.
Well, there's the head coach still there,
right? So they're in this tier because they're repeating what the last 2 national champions did.
But are we saying Natty or bust for them if they don't play SMU and Boise State?
No.
Like, what if what seed were they? They were the 7.
Yeah.
They were 7-10 against SMU, and then they played the 4 seed. What if they were an Indiana spot?
So what essentially,
what if they were the 9 or the 11? I think was Indiana playing at Notre Dame.
Essentially, what you're asking me is, what if Ohio State didn't lose on November 30th, and so Penn State couldn't backdoor its way into the Big Ten championship game, which is why they got that seed.
Correct. What if they were the 9 seed playing at Tennessee and they lose?
It'd be tier 2. There wouldn't even be a conversation.
Yeah. So that's what worries me, is that their Natty or bust is built off of, we just made the semifinals and we're bringing back most of this team. Well, what if you don't get that draw? What if you go, there's a realistic path to them going 10-2 this year and not making the Big Ten title game.
Yeah.
So they go 10-2, they get like the 9 seed, maybe the 10 seed, and all of a sudden Natty or bust is turned into, oh, you're playing at Texas in the first round of the college football playoff. But listen, you set your own expectations.
They got a path they didn't earn. And so you're right. Because of that, we're putting them tier 1.
And we should be fair about Natty or bust, because even with Ohio State going into last year, Natty or bust was like, okay, but if you make the Final Four of the championship game, it might just depend on your draw. But you can't lose in the first round of the playoff.
Yeah, but that's why. The description is legitimate chances of winning a national title. Anything less than the Final Four appearance essentially means your season was a disappointment. So because it does come down to football at some point, right? Did the ball bounce your way here or there, right? Because they beat Texas by 2 scores, but the ball bounced their way on some of those plays, right? Literally, the scooping score is literally the ball bouncing Jack Sawyer's way. So yeah. So yeah, that's why it's not your bust for the sake of grabbing a headline. But but if they don't win a actual national title, but it seems like they maximize their chance of winning a national title, then that's fine. Yeah. Ohio State put themselves in a position where they had to win a national title because of what happened on November 30th. They lost a little bit of room for some leeway here. You like how I'm avoiding the team we cover? Okay, I'm going to.
You want to go there first? You want to go to the team that Gillis covers?
No, I want to go to Oregon first. Just save Ohio State for last. Mainly because it's going to give away where I put Ohio State. Natty or bust for Oregon. You won the Big Ten championship last. Your only loss was to the team that won the national title, and it's unfortunate that was your first game, which is why I'm glad we're getting rid of the seeding, the weird seedings and bye weeks and stuff, because Oregon's reward for doing exactly what they were supposed to do for 13 weeks was playing a team who got hot, that they only beat by 1 point, and they should not have had to play them in the Rose Bowl. Now you're bust again. But again, I don't think last year was a disappointment for Oregon. In fact, we're removed about a month and some days away from the national championship. I still think the Rose Bowl was a pseudo-national championship game. Oregon it was the rust or rest thing, which is always a thing in sports. Ohio State had a game to build some momentum 10 days before they had to go play a team who was off for 30 days. I don't know if Oregon's on the other side of the bracket. Actually, I'll change that. If Ohio State handles its business and they're playing in the Big Ten championship game, I think Oregon gets through its side of the bracket and Ohio State gets through its side of the bracket, and we're seeing part 3. It just didn't happen. So last year wasn't a disappointment for me, even if they didn't get to the Final Four. Same thing for them, though, Dan Lanning in year 4. But with a little more pressure because he still is missing and I was having this conversation with Andrew, I think, when we were headed back from LA. I think. I might be wrong about that. It might have been Chicago. But Dan Lanning does not have a consequential win on his resume yet because he's got big wins. The Ohio State win was a big win, but it didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Nobody lost anything in that game. It's just, okay, they get to have the number 1 ranking in the first college football playoff rankings, but they get to do this again in December. Dan Lanning has not won a game where there were consequences if he lost it. He lost to Washington twice in 2023 in 2 situations where one cost him the second one cost him not only the Pac-12 championship, it cost him a spot in the playoff. And then last year, they lose in the Rose Bowl. When if you lose, your season is over. It's time for Dan Lanning to go win a game of consequence. Because even if they would have lost the Big Ten championship game, they were in the playoff regardless. So when there are actual things at stake for Dan Lanning, they haven't done anything yet. So I do think there's a little bit more pressure on his Natty or bust than there are on some other teams that we would even consider putting in this category.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that Sherrone Moore has some more consequential wins than Dan Lanning does.
Yeah,
depending on how you view that interim stint. So I'm with you. I have Oregon in this tier. It's tough because it is a bit of a rebuilding year in the sense that a lot of their rosters changing. I think of these top 4 teams that we talk about, they have the least amount of returning production, or at least players with significant production. If I'm not mistaken. Well, actually, no. Sorry, Ohio State. Ohio State has to be up there.
Yeah,
but I think out of Penn State, Michigan, and Oregon, I think Oregon's probably replacing the most. I don't know. I could be wrong on that, but it feels that way.
But they also transfer portal like crazy.
That's the thing, is they put themselves in a spot where you have to nail the transfer portal. And they had a good class.
Yeah.
And we'll see what their quarterback winds up being this year. But it does feel like Natty or bust. You have accepted that it is going to be Natty or bust for you every year because you're going to build a lot of your roster with the portal. They do a great job of high school recruiting. But you mix the 2 together, and the expectations, even when you lose a ton, are going to revolve around. They're going to revolve around being Natty or bust, I still think. So I still have Oregon in this tier. So let's talk about Ohio State then, because I think I'm closer to agreeing with you than disagreeing with you about whether Ohio State's in tier 1 or tier 2.
Okay, cool. Last thing on Oregon, they're a good recruiting team. They don't recruit. They don't have heavy. They only had 20 commits. Signees this year. They had 10 transfer portal additions as well.
You got to have room on that roster somewhere.
Yeah, because it does feel like every other day we're seeing an announcement that this guy has transferred to Oregon. It's like, how do y'all have room for all these dudes?
Yeah.
Y'all gotta have 180 guys on the roster, and you only get 85, man. So I've been poking at this and hinting at it on the pod, I think, for about a month. And I think it's going to be an ongoing concept for me of the talent base of the big dogs isn't as deep as it was in the 14 playoff era because of NIL, because of the transfer portal. So I am wondering if it is fair on a yearly basis, Natty or bust. Is that now a fair expectation? Which is why I went with 2 tiers of CFP or bust, or Natty or bust. Because I do not think we can ever live in a world where Ohio State is not in the college football playoff. That is a bad year. They can't go lower than 2. But I think it's fair to say they can go lower than 1 sometimes until you've seen them play football. Now, if they get on the field with Texas and it's a 41-14 win, I'm going to come on that Monday podcast and be like, hey, Stefan, can we redo the Big Ten tiers? I want to put Ohio State in the first tier and I want to put them at number 1. But they lost a lot of NFL talent, and it's Ohio State, so they're replacing it with NFL talent. But it's NFL talent that's not played a lot of football. It's a lot of we thinks. We think Julian Sand is going to be an elite quarterback. We think James Peoples is going to be a really good running back. We think Jermaine Matthews is ready to a heavy load of snaps, and we think that Aaron Scott and Devin Sanchez and Bryce West are ready to go. We think Arvell Reese is going to be awesome. We think Edric Houston.
We know Arvell Reese is going to be awesome.
I know. I'm trying to be. Let me have. Let's. We have one.
We got to play cool. We got to play cool for the listener.
Man. Like, you know what I'm saying? We have three people were hyperbolic about on this pod. Two of them, it's not really hyperbolic. It's just factual information. And the other one, just because we love Arvell Reese. We know Caleb Downs, we know Jeremiah, and we know Carnell. And I think even Sonny's still a thing because there might be another level we think he can get to. So he's still at least a thing. So 3 guys on a roster where they've got to find a starting 22 plus 10 to 12 other guys who are going to play that we know. And then actually, even Max Clare, you know what? I think Max Clare and Sonny Styles are on that next tier down from we know because we know Max Clare can be productive when he's playing for a team who can't win FBS games. We don't know what he can do here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's fair sitting right here to just go, Natty, you're bust. You're that talented. If they lose to Texas, are we going to go, what a disappointing loss for Ohio? Are we going to be like, shame on you for losing, especially because of when they're playing that game? That's why when I said what I said about a month ago about,
a blowout.
Yeah, unless it's a blowout. Because that just means Arch Manning is him and Julian Sand is not at all. But that's why I said what I said a month ago, and Andrew was just like, it does matter. I don't think it matters that much because these two teams having to play each other in week 1, really? There's no way on earth that they're the same teams on November 30th that they are on August 30th. That's just not even a realistic expectation. There's a lot of guys who haven't played. If Ohio State goes 10-2 next year, is it disappointing?
Probably not, which is why I think I lean with you of CFP or bust is maybe more appropriate. I just wonder if when we get into it and it comes to the playoff and they get a first-round game against, let's say it's Tennessee again. Let's say this time it's at Tennessee or something like that, or even home against Tennessee. When you get into the thick of it, is it going to be hard to say it was a successful year when Ohio State's one and done in a 12-team playoff? And I struggle with that because I feel bad for Ohio State fans that getting to celebrate this national championship has quickly started to turn into, okay, what's 2025 going to look like? Because Jim Knowles left within days of the championship game being done. I feel bad that they don't get to celebrate the way the Philadelphia Eagles get to celebrate a championship. But in this conversation, that's why I feel bad saying this, because Ohio State fans should have high standards, and they do have high standards. But we can't act like when December rolls around and the last game of the season is a loss, that it's going to be an easy pill for Ohio State fans to swallow.
For sure. Which is where...
That's why I'm just like, when you get into the thick of it, what's it like? Because we had even said, after they lost to Michigan, like, okay, get back to the championship game. But like... Mm-hmm. Even if they lost the championship game, there would be people who would still be saying Ryan Day's got to go.
Yeah.
So it's hard when your season ends on a loss at Ohio State to wonder, was it really CFP or bust, or was it always Natty or bust in your head, or like Final Four and bust in your head? That's where I struggle. And maybe it's the USC conversation of, if we're talking football, CFP or bust is more realistic. If we're talking program and expectations, does it still feel like Natty or bust is more realistic? I struggle with that. And I'd love for people to chime in, 614-350-3315. I'd love to know where Ohio State fans, where you sit today. Does the expectation change a little now that you've won and the roster is resetting a bit? Does it go to CFP or bust, or do you still feel like it's still Ohio State? Once August rolls around, it's Natty or bust is the only thing on my mind.
And I thought about it, and in hindsight, I probably should have sent that out, and we could have reviewed some of those today. I'm not perfect.
It's a long off season. We can have this conversation a million more times.
Because
we
I
are
think,
going to have
I think that's my conversation for the next 9 months of, okay, how does this, we're NFLizing college football. So how does that have to change what we consider a successful season? Because it's hard when a year ends on a loss. Well, that's the new reality, is only one team who has real legitimate championship expectations now cannot end their season on a loss. That used to not be true. 2021, they ended their season on a win with the Rose Bowl win. 2020, that's the only other year before this year that Ohio State has ended its season with a win. And it's because, they lost in the Cotton Bowl in a game that was bad, but it was bad for a lot of reasons that you almost have to throw out that Cotton Bowl. There was a lot going on with that team that was not just football related. They're trying to see if guys are going to they're having conversations while trying to prepare to play Missouri about, hey, Jack, hey, Donovan, hey, JT, are you going pro or not? They're trying to mine the transfer portal. Marv's not playing. They're starting quarterbacks at Syracuse, right? There was a lot that created a world for why they lost to Missouri in that Cotton Bowl.
Game was two worlds of Ohio State's going through a lot. Losing doesn't really matter. And versus Missouri being like, this is one of the biggest wins of program history.
Right.
And it should be that way. It should be that way for Missouri, but it's so funny how that game is viewed from two perspectives.
Yeah, which is why it's like it's the loss that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of Ryan Day's career as Ohio State. He has 9 real losses, and then whatever the heck that was down there in Dallas. Fiesta, would you say the 2019 season was a bad season, even though it ended in a loss in the Fiesta Bowl?
No.
Would you say the 2020 season was a bad season, even though it ended with a loss? Like it's a hard thing. Like the 2022 season was bad because you lost to Michigan, but everybody was fine because of how competitive you were. So this past year was Natty or bust because of all the narrative behind it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same reason why we're saying Penn State's Natty or bust, because you brought back all these guys, and what are you doing it here for if you can't even get to the Final Four? If this wasn't Ohio State, and we provided the description of what this team is going to be in 2025, we would be saying anywhere between tier 2 and tier 3. But because it's Ohio State, tier 1 has to be a conversation, which is why I put them in tier 2 of, I am fully ready for August 30th rolls around. We've seen spring practices, which I am wondering how much Ryan Day is going to let us see this year with the spring practice. In fall camp, we've seen some spring practices. We've seen fall camp. We know JJ and Carnell are awesome. We know Caleb is awesome. Boom! They just beat Texas 35-17, and we're right back in it. Yep, Natty or bust. They're ready to go. I just don't know if in a way too early conversation about this, when it's a lot of unknowns, if it's fair to anybody to be like, hey, you should expect your team to make the Final Four. When right now, if I had to do a way too early prediction about Ohio State's season, they go 11-1, don't make the Big Ten championship game because they lose to one of the teams who's playing in the Big Ten championship game, which I think Michigan might make the Big Ten championship game. And they win a home playoff game, and then they lose at a bowl site. I think that's where I'm at. And
I'd probably lean with you. You probably convinced me to put Ohio State in tier 2. And I think I have Ohio State in tier 2, and I still think they're the best team in the Big Ten.
I agree. They're tier 2 because we're doing this in February.
Right.
If they're tier 2 and tier 1 in November, it's because we watched them play football. And we're like, whoa, everything we thought was going to be good was very, very good. And also, Brian Hartline's a first-time play caller.
It's a lot of new.
So it's not fair to put them in tier 1. But okay, cool. I'm glad I brought you around in tier 2 because you got me with the Illinois one. So our tier 2 ended up being pretty big. Our consensus, Penn State and Oregon are in tier 1. We've got Ohio State, Michigan, and Illinois in tier 2. We've got Iowa, Nebraska, Indiana in tier 3. We've got Wisconsin, Minnesota, Rutgers, and Maryland in tier 4. UCLA, Michigan State, Washington in tier 5, and then Northwestern and Purdue in tier 6. The one place we disagree is USC. You have them in tier 2 because you went more of the overall expectations route, which is not wrong. And I went with what do I just think they are right now? what have you done for me lately? So I'll put them in tier 4. I thought that was a great conversation. 90 minutes. Leave no doubt pod. Get the text 614-350-3315. 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. Tell us where you agree. Tell us where you don't agree. And more importantly, just where you're sitting at with Ohio State heading into 2025 and what you think the expectations are for this team simply from a football standpoint, because I think the overwhelming thing is always going to be national championship or bust. But what do you think the football part of that is for what the 2025 season could look like? 614-350-3315. The combine starts tomorrow, at least with the GMs and the coaches. Stefan, myself, and Andrew will all be there. We'll be previewing the combine the next 2 days and bringing you plenty of information from that as 15 Buckeyes try to live out their dream and make it to the NFL. 614-350-3315, 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. For Stefan Krajisnik, I'm Stephen Means. That was Buckeye Talk.